Welcome to Not Remotely Entertaining, the series that looks at lockdown in a different light. We all miss the theatre, the cinema, and our favourite TV shows. But what about the people who work in the entertainment industry? Each week, we look at the challenges and changes of lockdown from a new perspective. Today, we talk to Jamie Parker and Deborah Crow.
Today we are delighted to have with us Jamie Parker and Deborah Crow, who are going to be talking to us about how the theatre industry is coping with lockdown.
Hello everyone.
Hello, welcome. So both of you are actors, you both work in the industry, meaning that you're not just speaking from the perspective of an individual, but from the perspective of a performing arts family, which is pretty exciting.
It's like there's no business like show business in our house.
To start off, can you explain a bit about what your backgrounds in the theatre and performing arts industries are?
So I trained at the Guildhall School, and it was called the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and I've found out recently they've changed it now, so it's just the Guildhall School, because it's encompassing a whole load of different ranges of the arts. And so that was a very long 4-year course. And after that, I worked in a bank because I needed some money because even 100 years ago, students would leave university or college with no money and debt. So, and then that got very boring. So I think the Stage is still around, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Stage newspaper. And I saw an audition in there for the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company. So I thought, I'll give it a whirl. So went to an open audition because I didn't have an agent, and then turned up at the Savoy Theatre on the wrong day. So I went the next day, which is when the audition was, suited and booted, and got a job in the chorus of the D'Oyly Carte Operetta Company. And then it was a case of just auditioning and getting an agent, and it was handy having something on my CV. So, then it was, what did I do
You started
after?
a working relationship with Martin Duncan, didn't you? And that
Yeah,
led on to the show we met on.
Yeah, so Martin Duncan was directing one of the D'Oyly Carte productions, and we became good friends. And then he was auditioning for another Gilbert and Sullivan, which was happening at the Chichester Festival Theatre. And called me and said, because I still didn't have an agent at this point, and so it really is who you know, not what you know, called me and said, can you come and audition for it? And so I did and got that, and that's where we met in that season, 2003, quite a long time.
And every day since has been
a dream,
a light operetta comedy.
It has.
And we've just kachuked our way through life since 2003.
Mm-hmm. So then after that I had a few lovely jobs. I got an agent after Chichester because we did a couple of production there. They do lots of things each season, and so after that I went into Phantom for a couple of years. And then after that I was really lucky. I just sort of hopped from one job to the next, which I think is quite rare for people to do.
Finish your job on a Saturday and start another one on the
Monday. It really was. I was
really annoyed.
Yeah. So ended up going into The Sound of Music, which was the one they did with. It was the sort of the first televised thing that they did on the BBC, where it wasn't anymore a case of going into a room with a panel of people. No, you now had to audition for the entire country, and they got to vote on whether or not you got the job. So that was all slightly terrifying for lovely Connie, who had to go through that, but she got the role. And then we turned up and did a year of that, and then after that it was kind of just plodding along doing bits and bobs. I was very pleased to get out of 8 shows a week in town because it was hard work. And I'd sort of had my fill of it, so I did a bit of touring, and I somehow found myself teaching Lambda, and that's what I've been doing now for about 12 years. And I love it. So yeah, it's
the sort of thing you can do on FaceTime and Zoom as well, which is
really great.
Like this, really good.
And I could do it as well with the performing. So yeah, it's all worked out.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky with how everything's worked out. So yeah, over to you.
I left school and went to. It took me about 3 years to get into drama school in the first place. I knew I wanted to do it from a very young age, but I didn't. I just had to keep on knocking on the door. Eventually got in, and I went to RADA for 3 years in '99. Elect came out in 2002, and it's mostly been theatre with occasional bits and bobs on telly and film and radio and sort of wherever the work has taken me. But it's I was lucky quite early on, the same year I met Deb, to land a job on a play at the National Theatre called The History Boys, which went on for quite a long time.
All his luck came at once, guys.
Yeah. And even though I went through long periods of not working, so in the second year of doing History Boys, all we did was the film, which was just 1 month over the summer, but for the rest of that 12 months I didn't work at all. And then when we finally finished on Broadway, having won all these Tonys and stuff like that, I then didn't work for about 9 months, something like that.
I was bringing home the bacon at that
Deb
point.
Deb was winning bread all over the place. And pretty much most of the jobs I've done since then have been based on a meeting that I would have had because somebody saw that play. It was a big play, or a relationship that then got formed out of that. So, I would work with someone based on them having seen that, and then I would work on something with someone based on them having seen that, and it just becomes this sort of daisy chain. I had an early mentor in the form of Dominic Drumgoole, who gave me my very first job before all of that. And years later, I came back and did some Shakespeare with him at Shakespeare's Globe. And then sort of one thing leads to another. And the last 3 years have sort of been taken up with Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. But that's all done and dusted now. And now here we are, trying to figure it out.
It is always extraordinary, isn't it? How there was a job that he did, and we weren't married, and we were living in London. I was in one flat and he was in another down the road, and he came round one day and I was in my marigolds and cleaning the flat, and he said, "Deb, you want to sit down for a minute?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I got the Tom Cruise gig," which was a film called Valkyrie. And guys, we thought, this is it.
Oh, it's going to change your life.
This is we are now multi-millionaire.
Never going to have to work again.
Get that Mercedes SLK ordered now, and we want it in black. We want it in matte black. And
this is what you're getting paid because it's your first job in film on a SAG contract, and you're never, So and sort of went, oh, okay, so I'll okay.
Cancel that then. Okay, let's just get a poster of it instead. And
it's never quite what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and then as soon as you've done the job, you think that more jobs are going to come smashing in, right? Because you've just been playing Tom Cruise's number one dude, and actually, no, that just doesn't happen. And we were doing red carpet gigs. And we had no money in the
searching for the bus fare down the back of the sofa with your tux on, trying to get to Leicester Square.
Guys,
to stand in front of the cameras.
It sounds very bohemian and slightly romantic, but it was real. It was real. We had no cash.
It's weird.
And yet I had Armani shoes on that some person had lent me. So it was, it's a very, very silly business.
It's all pretend.
Which of your jobs have been blown off course because of lockdown?
I'm supposed to be in the West End right now on a play by Rob Icke called The Doctor with Juliet Stevenson, and it's now, we're waiting to hear. We're in a weirdly better position than a lot of plays in the West End because it's already rehearsed and we've got the set and we've done the marketing, so we've spent that money. So as and when things do finally ease up, we should be placed to get back up and running quicker than other shows. But at the moment, we're just in a holding pattern like everybody else. So it's all adaptation. I built a studio here for recording and stuff, to do audio books and voiceovers and for all of us to use. And it's really come into its own, at this point. And that's great. But I was pretty analog in the work. I liked theatre. I liked the live theatre of it. And that gradually got more and more technical, very technical with shows like Harry Potter and stuff. But ultimately it's still just kind of an acoustic gig. And life has become extremely digital in a short space of time. And but it's a chance to learn new skill sets and, everything. It's kind of stuff that you feel like you should have known in the first place, but just crash courses in 3-point lighting. And
somebody else always did it, and now that somebody else isn't there. And so you have to be that person and learn those new skills. And at the age of 25, we are still open to
yes,
learning new things, but it is harder. There is no doubt about that. It is harder trying to, I find finding the patience, and especially when you've got a busy household and you're trying to homeschool children, and so it's an extraordinary time, and I want it to be over.
But we're in a, but we keep reminding ourselves of how lucky we are compared with a lot of people. So it's the adaptation. Life is adaptation all the time. It's just coming thick and fast at this point. And just try to see it as an opportunity to learn things that have been on the list or do those projects that have been on the list for a long time anyway. So there's a lot of positives to be found, definitely.
Saying that, what aspects of work would you say that you miss the most?
People.
100%.
It's people. It's society and companionship and just and variety as well. It's just like everyone's experiencing. It's the spice of life.
I don't believe it's human nature to stay away from other humans.
It's a strange.
It's very hard, and the teaching that I'm doing online at the moment. Because are you guys having lessons online?
I have my Lamdrin singing lessons online, but it's just not the same with Zoom.
It's really tough, isn't it? I mean, the students that I've got, we're cracking on with it, but doing exercises together if you're on a one-on-one it's strange, because I as a teacher am quite hands-on, and so trying to tell somebody to move to stage right when you want to just show them, or you want to be able to express an emotion, doing that in 2D is really hard. So a lot of the time we've just spent actually chatting. I believe a lot of Lambda is to do with that. It's not all about, let's pretend to be a puppy. It's actually just, how are you feeling? How is it going? What's annoying you at the moment? What's making you happy? And understanding what those emotions feel like.
So you mentioned the joys of homeschooling and voiceover work. Are there any other tasks that you've been doing to keep busy?
Well, we sort of coming up with our own little projects. I mean, it's called doing stuff on spec. You just keep your hand in trying to be creative in whatever minor way you can, especially if you're learning new things, like trying to record camera stuff up to a certain level and make it look half decent and sound half decent. Then even just doing a little 90-second video, you've got a whole bunch of stuff to juggle that where previously you would just have to come up, stand in the booth and just sing the song or say the words. Suddenly you're thinking about framing and lighting and inputs and resolution and noise reduction and compression and all of these words that you sort of are vaguely familiar, but you'd never really had to deal with them. So you're just the process of learning how to. Everybody becomes a writer, director, producer, engineer, auteur in their own right, and it's really interesting just setting yourself tasks of working on something a simple, very very simple little project, and noticing how when you're juggling all of that, you have to remind yourself when you actually start a take to bring your brain fully back into concentrating on just the thing itself when you're just performing. And that's I used to direct and act in stuff at school because it was the only way that shows would actually get on, and I loved that. I thought I was Kenneth Branagh at the age of 16, just without the talent.
You're better than Kenneth Branagh.
Well, that's School Magazine said that, Kenneth Branagh without the talent. But it's interesting reminding myself of that at the moment, and kind of going, oh yeah, it's just you can hear that I'm concentrating on other things, whereas normally I would just be. It's minor stuff, it's shades of nuance, but you just keep creative however you can. We're working with a couple of friends on a couple of musical projects and stuff. So you pre-record something, or you send somebody a track, and then they add it and you pass it backwards and forwards. I'm burning to have a crack at something like Sofa Session or Jam Kazam, where this idea with if you get your connectivity right, then you can actually make music live. It's a bit cumbersome. Everything takes 4 times longer than it's supposed to if you have to sort of layer recordings on top of recordings on top of recordings. What you miss is the immediacy of the just bouncing off
of it
each
happening, of it just being live. And
it's going to be fun seeing how this situation kickstarts technology and developments into ways where can you imagine going through the lockdown 100 years ago for Spanish influenza, which aside from it being 1,000 times worse as a disease, you really were isolated. You didn't have this kind of humane tech where you could at least see each other's faces and talk. It'll be really interesting to see just even in a year or two's time.
We had a nice chat with Paul Thornley yesterday, and he played Ron on in the show, and he's currently in Florida, and we got chatting about what we can see happening with theatre. I think that theatres will be the last thing that open along with cinemas, and what's it going to be like? I'm sure there are hundreds of people already writing plays about the coronavirus outbreak, and setting it so that everyone is 2 meters apart and the audience are part of that and being 2 meters apart. And, is it going to be a line outside that is 2 meters apart? And
well, then you end up with
but how do you perform a play 2 meters apart from people? I don't know. Maybe it can be done, and maybe there are some really innovative thinkers out there.
Well, just now the government have said that the UK can start filming again on TV and film productions, and everyone's saying how's that going to work? How
insane.
do you do a love scene 2 meters apart with a focus puller and a grip, trying to stay 2 meters away from the director of photography? It's just not going to happen.
Well, I'm sure if they employed me as director with my Lambda skills, we'd work it out.
But and of course the other thing is, especially theatre, if you have to, theatre under conditions of social distancing just aren't going to work, because you end up with a quarter of the audience and tickets at 4 times the price, and theatres are going to have to adapt at some point, but
a massive cut in wages.
As well. But it's it's all calibration. Just deciding what to do when your audience capacity goes down. The National Theatre's ticket prices were already looking like they were going to go north of £100 this year, and you can make decisions at that point. You can drop prices and try and attract more people, but if you physically cannot have more people there, then ticket prices end up going up. And I don't know. I thought that a lot of people in theatre would just prefer to not open. But the socially distant theatre isn't theatre. You'd rather not do it at all in a lot of ways. But it'd be interesting to see I don't know. I just don't know.
And will people want to put themselves in that position anyway? Pay £100 for the privilege of what?
Yeah, when most of the demographic are generally older people in the at-risk category. So, I don't know.
Who knows, guys? Who knows?
It's a knotty one.
You've effectively already answered my question there, because obviously the whole film and theatre industry have completely been halted. But coming out of lockdown, do you think that there'll be any other impacts that it could have on it aside from social distancing?
I think we're probably destined for one-man band kind of scale stuff, or at least we'll get increasingly complex productions, which are multi-layered one-man band productions. So you're already seeing some pretty cool music videos made by musicians and singers and dancers, all working remotely, and it's amazing what you can do to remain gripping and vibrant and imaginative on a screen, when it's just thumbnails of people working on their own in a room. Already we're seeing that become exciting at moments, but a lot of the time it's not. It's just it might be very beautifully sung or something, but you can't really sort of call it a production as such.
No.
So I just don't know. I think part of it's going to be technology. We may end up with entirely new consumption platforms and interfaces that we just don't have yet. I mean, when you think about how gaming, for instance, has over the last few years has developed. When a few years ago we didn't have stuff like Kinect, where the notion that you could control an interface just through body movement, or now you're getting to the point where you can control it using facial expression, and just nuance of body movement. Then you can see it being not too far of a stretch to start including other senses on top of sight and sound, and before long you might be including smell and touch in some ways that we can't necessarily quite fathom at this point. Even if we've already got things like vibration and airwaves. There are headphones and speakers that you can wear where it's not actually producing sound, it's creating vibrations against your bone in your head, which means that inside your head you can hear the sound, whereas if you just hold it to your ear, you can't hear a damn thing. All of this stuff is going to take time to come out, but what people do with it creatively is anybody's guess. It just comes from playing.
Have any advice for our generation in terms of entering the industry, especially because it's going to effectively have to restart after lockdown?
What advice would I give?
It's so different now from when it was when we were starting out. It's worlds apart, and I think I hope you can still make those human connections with directors and producers and casting directors. I don't think you're ever going to stop anybody. If somebody has it that in them that they can't see themselves doing anything else, then you're not going to stop them. If you can see yourself doing something else, anything else, do that. But if you can't see yourself doing anything, this is your life. You will commit 100%. You will commit to being out of work and having some kind of resource that can maybe keep a bit of money ticking in. But arm yourself with information, read, watch stuff on YouTube. We don't have YouTube, but now there's everything there is available for you to watch, from opera to stand up to full plays to, arm yourself with knowledge and
if you want to do it, watch it.
Watch the bad stuff, watch the good stuff, watch the stuff that makes you feel indifferent about the whole thing or fires you up. that isn't good enough. And then make your own stuff. Be your own creator. That's how. I mean, when I didn't have an agent all those years ago, I had to, when you were talking about being director, producer, and lighting and DOP, and I did that at 21 when I didn't have an agent. So I had to do the hard work of finding out the companies that I wanted to work for by what had they done? Did I like that kind of work? Did I want to audition for them? And then calling them and saying, I want an audition. How do I do that? And
by the time
then
you get
suddenly
in the room,
going,
yeah.
oh my God, I've got an audition. I don't want to sing. So it's managing everything. It's being multitasking. But all of that said, if you can see yourself doing anything else, do that, because it's too hard.
It's saturated market. It's as competitive a market as any other one you can get. I mean, it always used to be the line was that if someone say, what advice do you give someone who wants to do it? You'd say, don't do it, because if you're going to do it, you're not going to listen to the person who says don't do it.
Exactly.
And in fact, somebody saying don't do it is going to be exactly the fuel for the tenacity you need to get through an industry like this. Mm-hmm. You just have to keep going, despite the fact that everyone is continually telling you no, and you should maybe do something else. And if that kind of thing makes your resolve ratchet even tighter, then you may stay the course. The thing is, we're talking 15 years, 20 years down the line now from the starting off point, and at where we're standing, it becomes more about who's left in your casting bracket, because a lot of people have gone, oh, do you know what? Saw this for a bunch of bananas. I'm going to go and do something where I can actually know where the next paycheck's coming from, or you know, just life. Their perspective on life has moved on, and even though they might have you know, there are plenty of people infinitely more talented than me who are from my year at college, for example, who aren't doing it anymore because circumstances simply didn't allow them to.
I think we were we've just been so fortunate in
God,
our position, because when Jamie was getting we were able to have a discussion, which was, we're a team. We've decided that we're going to be a team, and that means that financially we can support one another. And because you've got
to drop your overheads though.
Well, because he'd had the history boys, and then we thought, brilliant, okay, well, this is it. And it wasn't. We then thought, okay, well, my Lambda teaching is going pretty well, and I was travelling from London down to Hurst Pierpoint twice a week and staying with some very dear friends who very kindly put me up. But we made that decision there and then, Jamie and I, that okay, I'm gonna stop auditioning, and I'm gonna carry on with the teaching, because that's a solid income for us. And it means then that that Jamie doesn't have to play parts or go up for parts that he didn't really want to. So we took quite a ballsy stance on it, and we had a bit of money coming in, and so we just thought, right, okay, if I can keep that happening, I'm willing to do that, and my time will come later, and if at all. So it just meant that it worked. It just worked out. We were just so lucky. We were so lucky.
You try and create conditions where you can be as discerning as you can afford to be. And if you've got a huge amount of outgoing and a life that costs a lot of money to run, then your choices are, your freedom of choice creatively is going to be a lot. You're just going to have to take whatever work you can possibly get your hands on, and when the work dries up, and it always does, then you're going to have to find something to fill the breach. Whereas, however you can drop your overheads and create a life that requires less money to run, and not overextending yourself, then you can take a company wage play, earning next to nothing, but if it's a good play and a good part, you can cut your teeth, and you can do that and give yourself the room to do that. But it's a big worry in this industry that it's for years now, it's increasingly become an arena for middle class people who can afford to do it. And that's a problem, because you lose diversity of voices in it.
I suppose also when we talk to our teachers and ask for guidance in terms of getting into drama school, obviously they try and be supportive and guide us, but ultimately they have to be really honest that what we are trying to do is really difficult. And there's quite a few people my age that are kind of freaking out because they feel like the industry is fading away. What would you say to them?
It will adapt, but there's an increasingly well-known paper, which is probably you guys have probably got it on your radar already, called "The Future of Employment." It was a study done. I forget where. It might have been in Canada somewhere, but it was two guys who basically studied the likelihood of any particular profession being automated or computerized over the next couple of decades. And at the top of the list, you got stuff like bank tellers and whatnot. Apparently, the safest job is paleontologist, which is as much to do with the fact that there's no investment in trying to automate it as it is to do with the fact that it can't be automated. But actors and writers and dancers and directors and producers are on that list as well, and it's interesting seeing which ones are higher up and which ones are lower down the risk. For a while now, with the explosion in digital content and performance capture and all this kind of technology, I've been sort of saying that in a way, theatre has a kind of edge, because it's analog, it's acoustic, and it's biological. You can't automate an actor walking onto a stage and gauging an acoustic space and filling that space with unenhanced and unaugmented humanity. Increasingly so. I mean, they'll get there. They will get there eventually. But at this point, right now, it's at less risk. But then you throw COVID-19 into the mix, and suddenly that edge is well and truly gone. So I would say that study is probably an interesting place to start, just to give you a context, and maybe to think about this industry in that context. And new jobs will be invented and created, that will take their place. But what those jobs are, we don't know.
Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. Yeah,
Pleasure, guys.
it's been so interesting.
Especially with all of your advice about young people, because our generation is just trying so hard to get into this industry.
Definitely. And you've explained so clearly the sheer level of motivation and drive needed to succeed and to survive, which is beyond helpful. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It was really nice talking to you.
Good luck out there.
Not Remotely Entertaining was a milestone at Hurst production. It featured Jamie Parker and Deborah Crow as our guests this week. It was created by the Milestone Productions team: Chloe Hester, Heather Law, Ellie Raywood, Martha G, Hannah Jackson, Beth Clear and Margot Campbell. Original music was by Holly Townsend. The producer was Luke Gasper, and it was a production from Hurst College. Welcome to Not Remotely Entertaining, the series that looks at lockdown in a different light. We all miss the theatre, the cinema and our favourite TV shows. But what about the people who work in the entertainment industry? Each week we look at the challenges and changes of lockdown from a new perspective. This week we talk to Ben Ferguson.
Hi, my name's Ben Ferguson and I'm a musical director.
Hi Ben, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's really great to be on here.
Today we look at the other side of theatre, so not the actors, not what's going on stage. Instead, we hear directly from the orchestra pit, which isn't something that's been talked about that often. What steps did you take to get where you are now in the music industry? And how did you get involved in such a high-profile show like Les Mis?
So I started learning the piano when I was 4 or 5, and I started singing in my local church choir, or reasonably local church choir, when I was about 7. And I just played the piano and sung because I loved it, and because it was lots of friends who did it, and it was something that I was really good at. I was never particularly good at playing football or rugby, but at school I was a really good musician, and so it was kind of the thing that gave me my joy and my pride, really. I didn't really consider that I might do it for a living until I was about 17, I reckon. I think until then I wanted to work for NASA and send people into space. But I think when I was about 17, I was looking at applying for universities, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do maths or something to do with maths and physics or music. And we had a talk at school from some lecturers at different universities, and the one thing that lots of them said was that they were all looking for people to come study at their universities who were really passionate about what they wanted to study. And I was quite good at maths, and I quite liked it, but I loved music, and I thought, well, that settles it. I've got to go and do music at uni. And then I think I didn't really realise that music theatre was definitely what I wanted to work in until I worked at Hurst, and I worked at Hurst in 2010 to 2011 on my gap year, mainly in the prep school with Mr. Travers. And I was his assistant, really, and did all kinds of things. Did a bit of music theory teaching, lots of working with musical ensembles. I used to play the organ for services and things like that in the chapel. And one of the things that we did while I was at Hurst was Mr. Gasper gave me the opportunity to write a musical. And we had a cast of about 10 people, and I wrote a show about a load of people who go back to a school reunion 20 years after they've left. And the play was called, or the musical was called, Whose Life Is It Anyway? And we did it in the summer term. And it was about that time I thought, this is it. This is what I've got to do. This is just brilliant, music and theatre and drama. And from that point on, I kind of thought, I've got to go and try and do this for the rest of my life. And I went to Manchester Uni and did a load of musicals up there, both at the uni and some sort of local amateur stuff. And then I auditioned for a course at the Royal Academy of Music to do as a postgrad, and they were one of the only places, and still are one of the only places in the world, to offer a postgraduate course in MDing for theatre. And they have an amazing array of teachers who are absolutely like industry leading musical directors to teach on it. And I was just thought, my God, this is the perfect place. And it was a pretty competitive course. They only took 2 people on it each year, and more than 100 applied. But I was really, really lucky to get a place, and I went there and did that for a year, and that opened a lot of doors to the industry for me. When I graduated, then I did lots of work on fringe shows in London and stuff around the UK. I worked in Sweden for a bit. But one of the first things I did out of the academy was start playing auditions for Les Mis in London. One of the things it's hard to appreciate if you go and see a big musical in London, particularly one that's been running for a number of years, is that it's just a sort of constant cycle of people auditioning, rehearsing a new cast, and then that cast performing. And so the cast would change every June or July, but from January until June, they'd be auditioning new people for next year's cast and rehearsing them. And so I would do sort of weeks and weeks of playing for auditions, of people bringing in their own songs and singing them, and then working on some of the material from the show. And then I did that, and then I did a few of other big shows in town. I used to play auditions for Phantom and for Miss Saigon and Mary Poppins, and that kind of got me in to know lots of the music staff at Cameron Mackintosh's office. Obviously he's perhaps the most famous producer of music theatre ever. And eventually they invited me to audition to be in their music department for a new tour of Les Mis, which would have been in summer of 2018 maybe, and they offered me a job on that. So to begin with, I was the assistant musical director, and I played in the orchestra and would conduct the show once a week or twice a week. And after about 15 months or so, the musical director left and they offered me that job. So I guess that's kind of the long story of how I got there, really. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I did lots of different things for a long time, and then Les Mis was kind of the first really big show that I got an opportunity to be involved in the day-to-day making of, rather than sort of, auditions or rehearsals or things. So yeah, and then obviously the tour is sort of on pause at the moment, and we're very much hoping it'll pick up and we can continue it when this sort of lockdown and all these restrictions finally end.
How have you been working to keep the Les Mis tour alive, despite audiences being kept out of theatres?
It's just one of those things that to do, we just have to do the show, really. Because it's a tour, the tour's running for just over 2 years. So the first half of it we had one cast, and then we have a second cast who are doing the sort of second 14 months or so of it. But they're all auditioned and rehearsed, and they're now in the show, and all their understudies are rehearsed as well. So the actual day-to-day running of the show, it was just the show. It was nothing else to go around it. So there's not really anything else for us to do at the moment. The set is all packed away in trailers and in warehouses, ready for the next venue for it. But aside from that, really, we all need to be together in the same room to do anything. There is obviously sort of bits of admin that go on behind the scene in the office, but I don't really have anything to do with that. And to be honest, even the people who do that don't have very much to do, because there's no admin to do. There's no reason to be sending emails or booking venues or sorting tickets or anything like that. So it does sort of feel like we've just pressed a big pause button, but hands are over the play button, ready to go again.
Is it a bit weird then for you, having come out of such an intense working schedule, to just doing nothing for weeks on end? It must have been a bit of a shock.
Yeah, I mean, it's been bizarre because it's a really full-on job to be the musical director of a big show, because we do 8 shows a week, and the musical director will conduct 7 of those, and it's a 3-hour show, and it's all music. So it's a very sort of physically tiring job. It's a mentally tiring job. There's a lot that goes on in terms of, there's a lot of other admin to do on the show that's not just to do with the actual physical music making. And then suddenly we've gone from that to having weeks and weeks of spare time. And at the start it was a bit of a blessing, because it'd been a very, very busy first 18 months since we started, and I hadn't really had a proper break aside from 4 or 5 days of holiday here and there. So I was quite grateful to have a few weeks at home to rest, but I'm now absolutely desperate to go back to it. So, I've been working for Tesco's for the last few weeks, trying to, do what I can to contribute to sort of the community and society at the moment, just because I feel that it's really important that young, healthy, fit people are out and working, and that we can protect the people who are most vulnerable to the coronavirus, which has been really good, because it's really nice to have some customer interaction and sort of regular human contact and things. One of the things I missed most about the show is every night you get up on the podium, there's a different family or a different couple or a different person sitting right behind you, right where you conduct, and they're often really, really friendly, and it's very nice to get up there 5 minutes for the show and chat to them and find out about it, and they're always interested in what goes on in the pit. And that was one of the things that I really look forward to and then really missed when it stopped. And so it's been nice to be at Tesco's and have some sort of customer interaction again. And also it has been a really good opportunity to brush up on some skills and learn some new skills that I would never have had the time to do otherwise. I've been teaching myself to use 2 computer programs, one called Ableton and one called Dorico, which are very geeky and but quite important in sort of how shows are run and becoming more and more widely used in the music industry and the theatre industry. So this is a good opportunity to learn how they work. And like almost everybody else in lockdown, I've learned how to bake bread. But but yeah, I am now at the point now where, as I feel everybody in the industry is, we're kind of desperate to get back and do the thing we love the most and we're all best at, really.
You mentioned working for Tesco's to get back some human contact. Would you say that's what you miss most about your job?
I think that's the case for all of us, although lots of us are living with our families and things, it's lovely to spend time at home and to see them and all. But I think, we had one of the things about the tours, we had a really terrific cast, really lovely people, a fantastic orchestra, lots of whom are really close friends. And we spent a lot of time together, both professionally and socially, and also the backstage crew, the people who work in the company office, the stage management team, the crew. We were a really kind of close-knit group of people, and you really miss going into work every day and chatting to them. We'd start work every day by having a big physical and vocal warm-up on stage, and everyone comes together, and we sort of focus on the day, the show, or the 2 shows ahead. And that's the thing I miss the most, and the thing that I can't wait to go back and do. I really hope on the first day of rehearsals it's sort of socially acceptable to give everybody a hug, which it isn't at the moment. But the people is the thing that feels like it's the biggest void, really.
So you're all hovering over the play button, as you say. Is there anything that you're doing to keep the music in your head, or have you decided to leave it be?
To be honest, I actually haven't really thought about the music for the show, very much. For 2 reasons. One is that we're absolutely saturated by it, obviously, it's a day-to-day at work. And one of the things that's hard about being on a big show and on tour like that is that you don't get as much time to play other music and even listen to other music as you would like, and so it is quite nice to have a bit of a break and to go, I'm just going to leave Les Mis for a little bit. But the other thing is, I think once we know when the show starts again, I'll prepare for that like it was a new show starting up, and I'll relearn the piano score, and we get and kind of revisit the show and get it back into my head. But that looks like it might be 6 months away, and so I feel it's easier just to let it go and then relearn it than kind of keep it ticking over, because hopefully then when I relearn it, I can come to it a bit refreshed and have a kind of a newer perspective on it, and make it feel like a kind of new beginning, really.
What do you think will change after lockdown about the performing arts industry and, these big shows like Les Mis? Do you think it'll be different or just pick up exactly as you left off?
It's a really good question. I honestly don't know. I feel like it's possibly naive to imagine we'll just pick up again like it was and go back to it exactly like it was. I feel that it's going to take time for particularly for audiences to feel comfortable and feel safe coming to the theatre. Obviously, theatres won't open until it is safe to do so, but if people are out of the habit of going to see theatre regularly, that will take a bit of time to build up. So I suspect we'll feel like we kind of ramp up to it rather than just kind of explode out of the gates to doing 8 shows a week again. As audience numbers build and as we get used to any differences there might be in how we have to run shows. These big musicals, it's just not possible to maintain social distancing either on stage, because you can't stage a show with a cast 2 meters apart like Les Mis or like Phantom. You might be able to do it in a 2-hand play, but and it's just doesn't work commercially to have a theatre that should hold 1,000 people have 300 in it. That's just not practical. And also there's a point Cameron McIntosh made on the radio a few weeks ago, is that that's not the experience you go to Les Mis for. You go because it's so visceral, it's so in your face, and because you feel that emotion with the people sitting right next to you. And if they're all sort of the equivalent of 4 seats away, that's not the same. So as I say, I think it would be naive to imagine we'll be straight back to exactly how it was. I hope that the publics still are interested in and still kind of yearn for the opportunity to go and see these big shows and to hear these stories and hear this music. I hope they do. I hope people will be so hungry for it when lockdown ends that they'll flood back. But I think it will also, there'll be a lot of this. This has been a very, very unbelievably difficult time for so many creatives, actors, and producers, that I hope it will focus the work that we all create on to making sure that everything we produce is extremely high quality. And I hope what it doesn't do is that everybody defaults to cheap entertainment at the end of it, and that people will be even more commercially conservative. And I hope that the opposite happens. I hope that we use it as a platform to really challenge people and to challenge them emotionally in ways that they can't be in lockdown, and that you can only be live in a theatre and that you can't get by watching Netflix, rather than sort of trotting out a musical based on ex pop stars back catalogue with some good dancing and good tunes in it. I hope that we make a progressive step forward rather than a recessive one, but the honest truth is I don't know, and so we will see. But yeah, I hope in terms of big mega musicals like Les Mis and Phantom, I hope people still want to come back and see them, because they have lasted as long as they have, because they are so brilliant, and they will still be so brilliant at the end of all this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think theatre at the moment is such a classic example of not knowing how much something is valued until it's gone.
Completely.
And I think people will come back because it's such a key part of our society. And hopefully the long time that theatre hasn't been around will make them more eager to come back and to be engrossed again in the mystical world of theatre. Because I think that's where theatre has the edge. It can take you into a completely separate world, which is something film and TV might not be able to do. And so yeah, I think people will come back and they'll watch these prestigious shows with joy and newly found appreciation. listeners in terms of getting into the music and performing arts industry?
I think the first thing to say is that you do have to really, really want it. It is not an easy industry to be part of, and it can be unbelievably rewarding, and it often is unbelievably rewarding, but it can be tricky, and it can be very, very hard work, and it's easy to feel like you've got one good job and I'm away, I'm sorted forever, and that just never is the case. So just, if it is something that you're thinking of going into, just be prepared for it to be really hard work, and use that to really focus you on it. I think it's an industry of you need to be very good at what you do, whatever that is, whether that's acting or whether that's playing an instrument or singing or puppetry or any other of the multitude of skills that you might have. But also your ability to interact with people is very important, and I think that's as much something you can work on as comes naturally. I have to work quite hard on it. I often feel like I'm not very good at meeting new people and talking to them about what interests them and talking to them about what interests me, and finding out where those two things overlap, whether that's a director I really want to work with, or a producer I really want to work with, or even a music supervisor who I would like to work under. And I feel that working on your people skills is just as important in many ways as working on your technical skills. I suppose also it's easy to hear lots of cynical stories about the music and theatre industry, and there are lots of cynical people in it, and lots of those stories are true. But I think it's really important that for younger generations, and I include myself in this, is that we don't fall into that trap of cynicism about things too quickly, or at all if possible. And it's really important to remember why it's something you want to do. How sometimes I think when I stand up, to conduct a Tuesday afternoon show of Les Mis in Newcastle, I think, oh God, this is a long week and we've still got 7 more of these to do or something. But I remember what it felt like to hear the first 3 chords of it, and I think there's probably somebody in the audience hearing it for the first time who will feel the way I did when I heard that. And it's really important not to forget that feeling and to retain that passion for the music or for the drama, for the craft, and not to take stuff for granted when you're in a position to do so. It's hard to do, but I try and remember it as often as I can, because especially when it all goes away, like it does at the moment, you think I don't care about that show where you're knackered, or that show where you're not feeling well, or you've had a bad day doing something else, and you think, I really don't want to play this music again, or I really don't want to go on stage and have to put my heart and soul into this. But then when it all goes away, you think, my God, I'm so desperate to do it. I was doing the thing that I love more than anything, and I will be able to do that again. So yeah, I think that would be my advice to a younger me, and so hopefully that's useful advice to your listeners as well.
Well, thank you for coming on the show today. It's been great.
It's been brilliant hearing about what you've been up to for the past few weeks.
And the mindset that you've adopted for going back to work is really positive, and we've learnt so much.
We've loved it.
Well, thank you for having me on here. It's been a real pleasure. I hope something I've said is remotely useful.
See what you did there? Not Remotely Entertaining was a Milestone at Hurst production. It featured Ben Ferguson as our guest this week. It was created by the Milestone Productions team: Chloe Hester, Heather Law, Ellie Raywood, Martha G, Hannah Jackson, Beth Clear and Margot Campbell. Original music was by Holly Townsend. The producer was Luke Gasper and it was a production from Hurst College. Welcome to Not Remotely Entertaining, the series that looks at lockdown in a different light. We all miss the theatre, the cinema and our favourite TV shows. But what about the people who work in the entertainment industry? Each week we look at the challenges and changes of lockdown from a new perspective. Today we talk to Damien Goodwin.
My name is Damien Goodwin and I am a director.
Welcome, Damien Goodwin.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
It's great to have you here. So this week we'll be talking about how the world of directing has changed. And I think directing in particular must be pretty difficult in lockdown because actors, writers, producers, musicians can work at home to a degree. But with directing, it must be so much easier to be in the same room as someone that you're trying to mould. So it sounds like it's pretty challenging, but a brilliant new angle to look at.
What pathways have you taken to get to where you are now?
I trained as an actor, so I started off as an actor, and I trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama, and from then I spent about 12 years working in the profession across theatre, television, film, and gained a lot of experience working across those mediums, and at the time I was had an ambition to direct at some point. I think as a lot of actors do actually, but I decided during that time that at various points when I was out of work that I would write and direct my own fringe shows initially. And I did that, and I put on a number of fringe shows, and also worked with other people on their fringe shows, directed a couple of shows in London, and I'd always had a real passion for film and television. And I suppose during that time I was trying to work out where I wanted to, what medium I wanted to tell stories in. I'd also, when I was working as an actor in film and television, found myself hanging around the crews and the director of photography and listening to the director, and had developed a really keen interest in how to tell stories with a camera, and also the sort of intimacy that you could get on a film set that seemed to me a really sort of powerful thing. So I ended up writing my own short films, and I started to make short films, initially with very little money, or no money at all. I just tried to cobble together friends in the business who were keen to work with me, and certain members of film crews that I befriended along the way, and I managed to persuade them to do projects that I was passionate about. And it was an interesting process, because while I was doing that, I was discovering that I was much better at selling a project I was passionate about than I was at selling myself as an actor. And so this sort of developed into me making some shorts, and I had a screening of one of my shorts in London. And one of the bits of advice that I was given was to find the best people you possibly can to work with when you're doing shorts. So I sort of was quite dogged about tracking down people who I felt shared a similar vision, but also were top of their game. And one of the reasons for this is that, you work with the best people, and they're you're learning lots from them, but also that's something that your project benefits from. So after my screening, I just in central London, I decided to invite everybody I knew in the industry along. and an agent came to that, a directing agent, who ended up offering me representation as a director and as a writer. And very soon after that, I started working in television and directing. My first show was Hollyoaks, and I spent 3 years up there. And then from there, I kind of was lucky in that I was able to work between drama, a bit of documentary, and also dramality. I was sort of one of the, I think it's the second series of The Only Way is Essex. I started working on that show, and that was kind of interesting because it was a format that had never existed before. So it was quite interesting to be there kind of modelling something that really didn't have any sort of sense of identity, and no one really knew what it was. And it obviously became a very successful format and was sort of repeated in other ways with other kind of sets of people. Through that process, I also was developing my own work and writing and trying to get projects off the ground with production companies. And then I ended up meeting an old friend who was an actor that I worked with at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield on a production of Hamlet on a train. And he was working in video games. We were sort of old friends who, years ago when we were working as actors, and he had literally that day, I think, had gone and they were looking for directors who were working in the medium of film and television and theatre to work in games. And so that's around 10 years ago, and I started working in video games, and that's been quite a major part of my career since, working across, AAA titles, from Assassin's Creed to The Witcher, to Dragon Age, and then to also smaller indie titles and virtual reality games. And that's sort of where I am now, really, sort of working in games, occasionally working back in television when I can, and also developing concepts and ideas for programs and also games.
Have any ongoing projects at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting time because obviously there was a kind of initial hiatus when the kind of lockdown occurred, which, as there has been for everyone. But after a little while, when things have sort of settled down, the work really started to pick up relatively quickly. And I think that's something that's unique to games in a lot of ways, in that it is possible for games companies to work remotely. And I work on all the story elements of it. So with actors, either doing voiceover or performance capture or motion capture or facial capture. And so that usually takes place in studios where you're with the actor. But a lot of the voiceover work especially can be done remotely. And obviously this is something that, has evolved in the last 5 years to 10 years in terms of technologically. But I can sort of sit at home and link into either a studio in London or into actors working remotely who've been sent equipment to set up studios in their own houses, or a lot of actors now have, especially in the current circumstances, have set up their own home studios. And then you essentially can link up with clients who may be in Canada, let's say, on a Zoom call like this, and you can work in a very, very kind of productive way. There are obviously certain elements of games that are tricky to do, but actually there's quite a lot you can do effectively remotely. And obviously one thing that people are doing, as well as watching Netflix and Amazon Prime, is playing games. So the demand for games is as strong, if not stronger, than it's ever been before.
Yeah, there's definitely an upside, isn't there?
It's an interesting time in terms of kind of narrative and storytelling, and the evolution of the connection between games with other narrative forms of storytelling, and and how now we're kind of not only embracing cinema within games, because there's been a need over the years to make games more immersive and more cinematic, but also theatre. There's quite a lot of work now in terms of projects, in terms of audiences of the future, and using some of the lessons we learn as storytellers in theatre in virtual reality or augmented reality or mixed reality, or so there's quite a lot of interesting, diverse work going in these sorts of areas.
What would you say has been the biggest challenge for you working remotely?
Well, I think it's the interesting thing about bringing creative people together in a room where you have eye-to-eye contact and sense of physical presence, and even though like in this situation we're able to chat remotely to one another and we're able to see each other, I think the things I miss are things like tea breaks. And although that might sound like a flippant thing, I sometimes find that those are the times where really interesting conversations can spring up. And you're very used to, when you're working on a project, of working very intently in a room, whether you're rehearsing a play or filming something, but it's very often the moments where you step away and you have more relaxed conversations, that really interesting things can spring up, and someone can say something that they hadn't said in the rehearsal room because maybe they were too, they didn't feel it was the right place to say it. And it's very often there was this story in terms of Trevor Nunn. No, it was Terry Hands, I think it was, who would always put his hat. He'd always take an actor aside and put his hand on their shoulder. And one of the reasons he did that was that sometimes the idea of talking about performance in front of a group of other actors is not necessarily the way that everyone likes to work. Is sometimes the way you want to work is you want to have just a one-to-one conversation with your director, or you want to talk to the writer about a particular issue that may be, that may need modifying within the process or thing. And, those sorts of moments that happen outside the rehearsal room are really important as well and feed into the rehearsal room. So it's a slightly lonely process at the moment where you say, let's have a 10-minute break, and you go to the kitchen and put the kettle on, and you're alone with your thoughts, thinking it would be really interesting now just to have a chat with the the writer or the actors, just to see how. And it's also a great way of monitoring how things are going, those sorts of downtimes as well. So it is that, it's the old thing, and I think it's very familiar to anyone who is used to working collaboratively with people, is that you want to be in the room with people. Essentially, you want to be not only playing with them in the rehearsal room, but also outside the rehearsal room. And part of that kind of spirit that you generate and that kind of atmosphere really feeds into the creativity. So I suppose that would be the main thing that I would miss.
Would you say that you've found any way of easing that problem?
Well, yeah. It's great having people that you work with regularly, because you do build up a shorthand and a way of communicating with one another. And also that's not to do with necessarily words, but sometimes in the pauses that people make, or the sense that you can when you're working with someone in quite an intensive way, then you have instincts, about how things are going, and I think it's sometimes, you have to try and generate some of those conversations, I think, while you're working. So you're sometimes working with unfamiliar people in games, for example, who are clients or producers who are on the end of the line. But basically, my focus is on the actor and trying to get as good a performance as them as possible. And sometimes that means, let's take 5 minutes and let's talk about this. as well as sometimes that means, okay, let's now pick up the energy and let's push this along. And, you know, actors work in very, very different ways. And it's about part of your job as a director is just finding the things that's going to enable that actor to do their best work. So you're constantly changing your techniques. And it's been a challenge to find new ways of doing that, you know, in this remote world that we exist in at the moment.
Replicating energy with other people is hard over a screen, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. And it's, you know, and sometimes it's, you know, it comes down to trying to generate that sense of play, you know, in even though you may be, you know, under a bunch of duvets in your own room, trying to avoid helicopter noise, that there's fun in that as well, you know, you know, and you want people, you know, when you're acting with people that you can essentially play with, and that there's a rapport between you, and you try and generate that, because sometimes it's just me and one actor, you know, so it's and that's very often the case. So, and I suppose that's why, you know, the experience I had as an actor previously comes in use as well, because I can kind of I have an empathy for what actors are going through.
What do you think the performing arts industry will be like after lockdown?
Well, I think we're at a really interesting point, I think. And I think the answer to this question is in a number of parts, I think. I think, first of all, you know, that I've got a lot of friends and colleagues in the industry who are having a very hard time at the moment. That's not to be denied. And, you know, and there are certain parts of the industry that are going to take some time to find their feet. And, you know, that live, you know, theatre, stand-up comedy, you know, even art galleries to a certain point, everything that needs a public space for audiences to share. It's going to be a struggle. I think there's some interesting conversations going on in terms of ways that parts of the industry who are doing extremely well at the moment, like Netflix and like Amazon, may be able to support some of the parts of the industry that are doing not so well. And, you know, that's of benefit in terms of, we're really fortunate in this company that we have a very talented people working across the industry, from film and television, you know, starting at sort of theatre with actors, directors, technicians, cinematographers. And a lot of these writers, and a lot of these people started in the theatre. So there's been a bit of a call recently, and I think Sam Mendes was someone who is a kind of big proponent of this, of parts of the industry supporting these tiers, because essentially that's where we get the talent from, and I think that's going to be an important part, and so that's going to be partly and something that the industry needs to look at itself in ways that it can help and support. But I think also from a government perspective, there are certain conversations going on at the moment about using the government almost as theatre angels in order to kind of, you know, to support theatre so they don't close, and so that there's because there's no denying that theatre is going to go through a rough patch. I think film and television is starting already now. I have friends who are back at planning schedules. There have been rules that have been generated by, you know, the BFI, BAFTA, and the broadcasters in terms of creating safe environments to shoot. And interestingly enough, I think that's going to be a creative place for finding new innovative ideas for making stories in this world that we inhabit, and how that's going to work. But I'm also extremely positive about it, because I think that, I mean, if you look at the Second World War, which was the last time when the industry had to literally shut down completely, what came out of that period was a resurgence of culture and the arts. And that was because coming out of that dark time, the sense that the arts are seen as a way of restoring a nation's identity and to a certain extent healing a healing experience for a nation is kind of imperative. And so from that came things like the formation of the Arts Council, the building of the Royal Festival Hall, the Edinburgh Festival was established. So I think that this is not necessarily going to be an immediate thing. What the creative people are very good at finding their way around things, and that this is a time, I think, where a new sort of inspirational thinking, creative set of people might come up and show that they can make work in different ways, and they can still tell stories, because we'll always, as a culture, want to tell stories, and they'll find new ways of doing that. And part of that sense of reinvention, I think, is really, really positive, and we might get some really interesting work out of it. And there'll also be a sense in which ideas and people who want to make work, we won't stop them. They'll find ways of doing it. And that's part of, responding to what's been happening, but also reflecting on it as well. So I think there's going to be some really interesting things that happen over the coming months and years. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I'm actually quite positive about the future, and I have great faith in creative people to find solutions and ways of doing things.
No pressure then.
Well, no, I mean, but it and it shouldn't be. I mean, I think that there's a sense in at which there's a lot of there's a lot of introspection at the moment in terms of looking in terms of, oh no, this is a tricky time. But I think that as you can see with a lot of organisations who are kind of putting stuff online, for example, even at Hurst, in terms of the way in which the way of teaching and things, the fact that you're doing this now, this wouldn't have existed before this pandemic. So you're already trying to come up with creative solutions to look at things in an interesting way. So it's already happening. So and that's and I find that quite exciting in a way.
So you mentioned already having a few video game projects on the go. Do you have any new projects already planned for after lockdown?
Well, what's interesting is, there's a number of projects that, because of the lockdown, that have been postponed or cancelled. So that I have had to kind of adjust some of my kind of timetable in terms of that. But what has also happened is new projects have come in. The thing with games is, very often as a director, you're working on a game for years sometimes. So, and you're not working solidly, but you might be working for 3 weeks here, and then in September another 3 weeks, because essentially games are so huge and that they're being kind of sort of built as you go along, and then new elements or chapters of the game that need to be worked on. So I've got some ongoing projects which are really interesting in terms of games. I'm also working with a theatre company and a virtual reality company, developing a new form of theatre, which is called playable theatre, essentially, which is a kind of a combination, a way of bringing the elements of theatre and games together. So that uses virtual reality, augmented reality, and also live performers on stage. So that's quite an exciting project. And I'm also working with a writing partner, developing some television drama. And we have spent some time really just trying to realign ourselves to how stories are going to respond to the pandemic. And the interesting question is, what will we want to watch as we come out of the pandemic, will we want to watch, the same sort of dark crime thrillers that we're used to? Will we? It's interesting, the huge success of a show like Normal People, that people have responded to that so positively, because essentially it's quite hopeful in terms of a drama and kind of a beautifully performed but simply told story. And so I think in terms of creatively, people sort of are trying to discover what it is that people will want. And I hope in some ways that things do change, because it seems right that they should, in response to something that's so globally big, and that we just don't go back to where we were before, because there's no denying that there's lots of strong, brilliant work there, but there's also a sense in which it would be great for things to evolve and change, and our stories to become more poignant and profound and interesting for us all, because we've all kind of been through this experience. So there's as always with directors, is you're trying to juggle a lot of balls in the air, and and hoping that they all land in some sort of formation.
So you went from being an actor at first to then directing. So how does the casting process for an actor differ for a director? Obviously you're not cast, but kind of being hired. Is there a lot of difference?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting question, that, because I remember for years going to auditions as an actor and, coming out, and what you do naturally is you go through a process of analysis where you think, did I do that right? Or maybe I was too light, maybe I was too dark, with my read. Maybe I didn't quite get the character right. And I think that you naturally do that as an actor. You kind of analyse your sort of performance in an audition. As a director, it's interesting because you suddenly realise that casting is very often based on such small proportions of things. You might be casting a role and see 5 actors, let's say, all very good actors and all could do the role, but it might be something very small within the performance that someone gives that that makes you want to cast that actor in the role. And that in television and film, that can be, down to physical things. Maybe you're trying to cast a family, and you're wanting, the actors to look like they come from the same family, let's say. So there's essentially, there's lots of criteria as a director that you that as an actor you sort of don't necessarily factor into the equation, because you think, your need to get the role is the great thing when you go in the room. I think the interesting thing is you want everyone as a director who comes into a room to be the right person. So it should and that should fill you with a confidence as an actor going in, because essentially you can only go in and give your best and know that the director is on your side and wants you to be the right person for that role. And it's often in games, for example, that it's sometimes a question of technique. It's because some things that you're being asked to do vocally is in terms of voiceover sessions, are things that you're just needing actors who have a great instinct, who you can kind of play with in terms of push them around, give them lots of different notes in order to get the right performance for them, who have a good energy, who are easy to work with, who obviously sound good, who have the right accent, who have the right kind of tonality for the character. So I think that you're much more aware as a director auditioning actors that of things that you're looking for, whereas an actor, you're kind of going in with a take on a character and you're hoping that take sticks, and you're also hoping that if it doesn't, that a director is savvy enough to say, why don't you try it this way? Because I have actually sat in rooms with producers who don't get that. They sometimes, I mean, I remember auditioning an actor years ago for a TV thing, and I knew him from theatre, and he was a great actor, and he came into the room and he read, and it was for a regular character in the show, and when he left the room, the producer who was with me said, I said, what did you think of him? And he said, I thought his read was too dark. And I said, well, I know that he could give a light read as well. Why don't we get him back in? And actually the producer said to me, really? He can do that? And I said, yeah, because he's an actor. So I think that there's sometimes this sort of, it's that ability to, be directed, very often. But sometimes in television, you're also dealing with films who just wants to see the tape and go, there it is. I don't need to kind of, look any deeper.
In terms of your process when you first get a script or a pitch for a game, what do you tend to do to develop your vision, and has it changed even slightly because of lockdown?
It's a really collaborative process. So, and it's all about, because very often with games company, they've been working on a project for years and years and years in terms of as a dev team, and they've been putting a lot of the elements together. So you sometimes come in quite far down the line. So my big thing really is trying to find out what they need and how to best fulfill that within the realms of the script that you have and the character and the actors that you're auditioning and the characters. So I would like just read the get to know the projects, talk to the various members of the dev team, the writer, and try and build up a picture of how to serve kind of a shared vision, essentially. And that might mean sometimes that you might challenge ideas as well, because they might have lived with an idea for a long time and thought a character was a particular way, but your perspective then becomes something that becomes valuable, because you say, well, what about if we thought about it like this? So you have that conversation. It's quite a unique process in terms of working on games, so that whereas that there would maybe, if I was directing a feature film, then it would be a slightly different thing, because maybe I was a writer director of that film, so my the genesis of that idea came from me, so I'd be fulfilling sort of my vision from the off in terms of that. But with games, it's very often it's about a shared vision, and there are lots of, there can be like 350 people working on one game, and in all different places of the world, and it's about trying to bring that vision together, so it's one thing and it's shared, and it has a kind of a sense of completion for everyone. So in that way, my process hasn't really changed in isolation. I would still do those things that I would do if I was in the room with someone, and it just might be that sometimes the information was a little harder to come by. Sometimes it may be need to, but that would be essentially it.
Do you have any guidance to offer to young people who want to enter into the performing arts industry?
Yes, I think that be bold. If you have the passion for it and you are prepared, it's not an easy profession. No one can deny that it isn't. But I think for people who really want to do it and really have a passion for it, it's there for the taking. And I think that it's also about getting involved, and working with different people, and having different kinds of experiences. And that might be that not necessarily experiences where you're just working on short films or with different directors on theatre pieces, or with actors, or on your own developing a project. That's also just experience in terms of experience of the world, get yourself out there and experience things and develop an attitude to things. And there's I produced a documentary a few years ago, which was about this kind of a generation of YouTubers, and we interviewed about 45 different young people who essentially were just trying to develop ideas and make content. And what was really clear from a lot of the work they did is they all had really interesting ideas that they had followed through on. They had tried to make something of, and and some of those things weren't necessarily hugely successful, but all of them were really, really interesting. And you never know in this industry where your breaks are going to come from. I think if I'd have started with a plan, I would have arrived now in a place that I wouldn't have even predicted for myself when I left drama school. I would never have thought I'd be working in games at this point in my career, because they were, and that's another thing with coming in the industry. Things are changing a lot, but it's just important to gain experience and to follow your passions with it, really. And keep positive, because this is I think it's a tricky time for especially people who might be coming into the profession, in terms of thinking, oh, hold on a minute, we've had this global pandemic, there's going to be no work in theatre, what am I going to do? I think that if you still feel that it's the place you want to go, then go for it, because things will change. Things are constantly changing, and it might be that there are elements of the profession that don't even exist now that come out of this pandemic that you can involve yourselves in. What is clear is we are always going to want to tell and listen to stories, because that's what essentially makes us human. And so there's always going to be a place for that in the world, and it's just how that happens, and I think that, as we can see sort of in terms of around the world with what's happening with the whole demonstrations, and young people are becoming very present in terms of wanting their voice heard, and they are kind of pushing the environmental protests, the Black Lives Matters protest, and it's constantly referred to about, and I think that you see the power of your voice there, and actually that's something that you can embrace and kind of push forward, and so you're making work about things that matter to you, that you share with other people. So go for it and get involved.
Well, it's quite nice to be proved wrong. At the start, I kind of said that we expected a director's job to be one of the most difficult during lockdown. But it's quite refreshing to hear that you've actually kept most of your jobs because of video games being quite remote anyway. And yeah, it's nice to hear something positive, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure, lovely to talk to you all. Take care.
Not Remotely Entertaining was a milestone at Hurst Production. It featured Damien Goodwin as our guest this week. It was created by the Milestone Productions team: Chloe Hester, Heather Law, Ellie Raywood, Martha G, Hannah Jackson, Beth Clear and Margaret Campbell. Original music was by Holly Townsend. The producer was Luke Gasper, and it was a production from Hurst College. Welcome to Not Remotely Entertaining, the series that looks at lockdown in a different light. We all miss the theatre, the cinema and our favourite TV shows. But what about the people who work in the entertainment industry? Each week, we look at the challenges and changes of lockdown from a new perspective. This week, we talk to Erin LaCroix.
My name is Erin LaCroix, and I live in Manhattan, New York. And I recently played Christine in The Phantom of the Opera on Broadway.
Hi Erin, and welcome to the very last show of Series 1. This week we get the international perspective of how lockdown has affected the performing arts industry. And not only that, but from Broadway itself, which is the biggest hub of theatre alongside the West End. So we can't wait to look at the differences. Can you tell us about your career so far?
So I moved to Manhattan, I guess it was about 5 years ago. And I graduated from college, Oklahoma City University. And right after that, I went on the road and I did a national tour of Jekyll and Hyde by Frank Wildhorn. I played Emma Carew. So I was on the road for about 7 or 8 months and then moved to New York City after that. I auditioned a lot. And really, I guess my first professional production after living in New York City is I did a world premiere of this show called Susatska in Toronto. And actually, Judy Kay, who was the original Carlotta in Phantom of the Opera in New York, was in that show with me, which was really fun. And Nick Wyman, who was also in the original company of Phantom of the Opera, was also in that show with me. And then, so I did that for 4.5 months in Toronto. And then came back, and then I did Assassins at New York City Center, which New York City Center is right across the street from Carnegie Hall. So I did that, and then while I was doing that, I auditioned for and booked Sweeney Todd at Barrow Street Theater. And I don't know if you all heard of that production with the Tooting Arts Club. They did it over there in the UK, the immersive Sweeney Todd production. But they brought that to New York. So I did that. I played Joanna. I had to dye my hair blonde, if you can imagine that. I did that for about 6 months. And then I did a regional production of Brigadoon, which has become one of my favorite musicals. And then after that, I booked Phantom of the Opera, and I was in that for that was my Broadway debut, and I did that for about 1.5 years.
How did the performing arts within the US, how does everyone react to this lockdown?
Well, it was really hard. Well, it still is hard, but it was really hard in the beginning. I think just because we were all trying to figure out what exactly was happening. So I will tell you, we got the news that Broadway was shutting down on March 12th. And I had that morning, I had been in 2 hours of a workshop rehearsal for 1776. And then I went straight to my matinee at Phantom. And the day before, there had been some rumblings about Broadway potentially shutting down, but we thought we were going to get through to maybe next week. And I remember I got to the theater, got ready, was getting ready to go on for my first entrance, and one of the stagehands next to me said, "Oh boy, they're shutting down Broadway today at 5 p.m. And so I got the news as I was going on stage, and nobody else knew at that point because my whole cast was on stage for Hannibal at that point. So I went on stage, did Think of Me, went all the way through the music of the night, went off stage, and my dresser and Leon, who helps me with my wigs, they said, "Well, Erin, they've said that Broadway is going to shut down until April 12th. And my last show with Phantom was supposed to be April 11th. And I went, what? So this is it right now. So that was all crazy in the moment. So I found out in the middle of a show, which ended up being my final show with Phantom. And It was, it was really hard in the moment. We had a mandatory company meeting right after the show, and it was a little chaotic because we were just trying to wrap our minds around what was actually happening. They told us to grab belongings from our dressing rooms if there were things that we needed, for the next month. And I mean, New York City shut down pretty quickly, and I actually left the city the day after. My family lives in central New Jersey, so they're maybe an hour to an hour and a half outside of Manhattan. So I left and went to stay with them, thinking, maybe it was only going to be for a month or so. And here we are, and it's the middle of June. I think early on we all really didn't understand the severity of it all, So I have gone back into the city a few times, and the first time I went back into the city after everything, I cried because I went down and saw the theater district, and it was just dead. I mean, silent, nobody around. And New York is just such a bustling city. And that's one of the things that I love about it so much, is everybody is going somewhere, everybody has a purpose, and I love the energy there. So seeing it that way was very jarring. But everybody's been handling it differently. I think some better than others. But I think that our theater community specifically has really banded together. I serve with this organization. It's called Broadway Hearts, and we go to children's hospitals in New York City and play Broadway bingo with the kids. A lot of times they're too sick to leave their rooms, so we're broadcast to their rooms. But we do like a Broadway bingo. They can call in when they get a bingo, or text when they get a bingo. So we do that, or we'll have sing-alongs sometimes. We've gone to the Ronald McDonald House a couple of times. But what's cool is we've been able to actually still do this with them via Zoom. And that's like the beauty of technology right now, like what we're able to do right now, so we've been able to do that. I know a few people, a few of my friends have actually they've made like music videos at home to send to the kids to just like help brighten their days. So there's silver linings if you look for them.
Aside from the rehearsals that you mentioned, have there been any other projects that have been cancelled because of lockdown?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything here. Everything's maybe not fully canceled, but definitely put on hold. So I was supposed to be in Cambridge, Massachusetts right now at the American Repertory Theater doing 1776. We actually did 2 weeks worth of online workshops. What would have been our first 2 weeks of rehearsal in Manhattan. And I was supposed to overlap Phantom 1 week with that. My last week of Phantom was going to be also my first week of rehearsals for 1776. And it actually worked surprisingly well on Zoom. And I think we were probably, if not the first, one of the first theater companies to do something like that. So it kind of felt historic in a way, I guess. But it was great. We, obviously you kind of hit a wall at some point because there's only so much you can do on Zoom with theater, but we were able to do like a table read of the show. Our music team had made tracks of some of the music, so we were able to listen to some of that. Our costume designer was able to give a costume design presentation, as well as our scenic designer. Diane spoke to us about her idea and concept of the show. Obviously, we did meet and greet with the cast on Zoom. They had a few professors from Harvard came and gave us some lectures, and we had group discussions. So it was really great. And I think it really helped people's spirits, because that was still pretty early on in all of this. This was maybe 3 weeks after the lockdown. It really helped everybody's spirits, because we would have rehearsal for 4 or 5 hours during the day, and to just gather and to have something to focus on and to work on, to give us a little bit of purpose during this time, because it's tricky being a performer in the midst of all of this.
Talking about all the things that you've been doing remotely, has there been any talk of like doing performances remotely or anything like that?
Well, I did do, so my alma mater, Oklahoma City University, we did a benefit concert for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. So they reached out to a bunch of alums who, have been on Broadway, are on Broadway currently, to put together a concert. And so I actually recorded a duet with a friend of mine, Jeremy Hayes, who was actually a former Rowell at Phantom of the Opera. We didn't do it at the same time, but we both went to OCU at different times as well. But we did No One Is Alone from Into the Woods. But that's been something I've been having to learn as well, because, you play it's so weird recording yourself into a computer, but you play the track, in one ear, and then I just sang my part, imagining what it was like Jeremy singing his part. But then they put the two videos together, and it's great. But so, I have done that. And I've done a couple of other things online, like on Instagram Live with a couple of people, and I've sung online. But yeah, there are virtual concerts happening for sure. I've actually had some friends who have put together their own personal concerts, and they've just, maybe they might charge people a fee and they give that to a charity, whatever money they make for their concerts, they give it to a charity. So, and that's one thing that I love about our community so much, is the theater community is just so generous. And at a time when I feel like we're just really hurting and people are unemployed, and it's not like we're in a position to really work from home, the theater community still chooses to give back, and that's one of the reasons I love the theater people so much.
Would you say that there's any big goal that you want to achieve after lockdown? Like there's one specific thing?
Well, I have, a couple of things. One thing I would really love to do at some point, I did my first solo concert with a Pops orchestra in New Jersey, Ocean City Pops, last summer. And what I would really love to do is build a couple of solo shows, and a big dream of mine would be able to take those solo shows throughout the country and perform with different Pops orchestras. There is nothing more thrilling to me than singing with an orchestra. I just love it. So that's one big dream. And I mean, another big dream of mine was, I would love to perform at the Tonys one day, and actually, I mean, with 1776, we'll have a cast album, and, if we're nominated, that will probably happen. So, that's another big dream of mine. And, hopefully that may come to fruition next year. We'll see. But that's another big dream.
After the coronavirus, do you think shows will have to change in format and cast size? Do you think this is going to change a lot of things?
Yeah, I think it's well, for shows currently that are still currently there, I think that it's definitely going to change in regards to the audience. I mean, there's still a lot of talk and a lot of speculation about that. I don't really know how it's all going to work. I don't know if they fully know yet. I mean, I would assume temperatures would be taken when people come in. I would assume people in the audience are going to have to wear masks. I think one of my big questions that I've raised and that people in my cast have raised, because we have, I don't do it every week, but we have a Zoom call with our Phantom company every week to just check in and hang out on Zoom. But one of the questions that we've asked is, well, as actors, we work so closely together and we're in each other's personal spaces all the time. And you think about a show like The Phantom of the Opera, and you have to have the ending. I mean, it doesn't really work without the ending. So I think our question is, okay, well, we can take care of the audience, but how do you take care of the actors with all of this and this social distancing? And because obviously we can't do that on stage. So, I don't know how they're going to handle that. I mean, I would assume, I believe the Phantom of the Opera World Tour, I have a couple of friends on that. Every time they come into work, their temperature is taken. And I know that they were shut down for a couple of weeks because a couple of people caught COVID. And so everybody self-isolated for 2 weeks before they could start up again. So I would assume that they would have our temperatures taken, but I don't know how that's going to work with actors, at least, I guess, before we have some sort of vaccine.
Do you think there's going to be a big delay in opening Broadway up again?
Oh, yeah. They're speculating here it's not going to be till January of 2021. And right now we're technically shut down until Labor Day in September. But I don't foresee Broadway happening until next year. And even then, I don't think they mean shows are going to reopen in January. I think they mean they're going to try to start rehearsals in January. And, and that's the thing too, is everybody's been out of the show for months. So they're going to have a lot of rehearsal. They're probably going to have to rehearse for about a month or so before they can even put the show back up. So, I think people are hoping early spring, sometime in March maybe.
Are international artists working on Broadway likely to be fewer with the restrictions that are in place, do you reckon?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, to be honest. I hope not. I don't think, I feel like the thing is, we obviously want to be smart about all of this, but we also can't live in fear with it. And so I don't think that there needs to be, personally, I don't think that there needs to be restrictions on international artists coming in. But I do think that people just have to be smart about it, as we're trying to figure out what this is and how to rectify the situation. And hopefully a vaccine will help solve that. But yeah, I personally don't think there need to be restrictions on that.
Do you think it's going to be harder for our generation to get into the industry with everything that's gone on?
Margot, I'm a glass half full type person, but I've thought about this. I will say, yeah, it has made me pause and think that it may be, for various reasons. I think it will be. It's already hard, but I think it may be, even more challenging for several different reasons that I've thought about.
Do you think there would be any advice out there to make it a little bit easier?
I think that if you could do anything else, do it. But if you can't, if you're like, this is what I have to do, this is what, brings a fire to my soul, I have to do this, then, I think then absolutely go for it 100%. I think it's one thing that I've thought about recently is like, you're always going to be working. So these people that you see that are really successful, like Kelly O'Hara, like Kristen Chenoweth, they are some of the hardest workers. And they don't just have things handed to them. You're always working. So it's not like, oh, I made it to Phantom of the Opera and I'm playing Christine and I'm on Broadway and this is it and I can like write it out. That's not how it works. You're still working behind the scenes. Like I was going to those auditions in order to book the next thing. So, I think I would encourage, whoever wants to do this to just make sure you have a really strong work ethic, to be developing that now, because it's a lot of hard work and it's not really going to slow down. But then also, I think what helps me is to remember that the people in the room on the other side of the table are cheering for you, because they really hope that you're the one that they need for this show. And so they really hope that they can book you because, they're trying to fill a void in their show and they hope that you're going to fill that void. And so to walk into the room with that mentality, knowing that, okay, they're on my side. They want me to do well because that's going to help them out a lot, if I am right for this. That helps. And then also, I think too, just for me anyways, what has helped me is the only person you're competing with is yourself. You're not competing with other people around you, because we're all individuals and we're all so unique and we all have different things to offer. We're going to see characters in a different way. We're going to sound different vocally. And so really you're just competing, I think, against your best. And, just always striving for more excellence. So I think if you look at it that way, in a way, it takes a little bit of some of the pressure off. So then you can just enjoy and be present in the room.
Thank you so much, Erin, for coming on the show today. Our last episode of the series. I can't think of any better way to end it, to be honest. It's been amazing hearing the differences between America and what we have here at home. And I think, whilst it might seem to be a bit uncertain at the moment, there is a sense of hope. And as you said, people are taking part in projects, and from what we've learnt over the course of this series, from everyone we've spoken to, is that we're all in the same boat, which is really reassuring. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens over the next few months. But thank you so much for coming on the show today and giving us your time to talk to us. It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me. Good luck on everything via Zoom right now.
Back to school. Not Remotely Entertaining was a milestone at Hurst production. It featured Erin LaCroix as our guest this week. It was created by the Milestone Productions team: Chloe Hester, Heather Law, Ellie Raywood, Martha G, Hannah Jackson, Beth Clear and Margot Campbell. Original music was by Holly Townsend. The producer was Luke Gasper and it was a production from Hurst College.